Hello and welcome to this overview of my 10th and latest map for Cities Skylines 2. This is Zwolle. The latest region pack is now here and we're traveling to the Netherlands. The pack was made by 4 fantastic members of the community: Feinbold, Jez, Gruni, and Revo. I've had a chance to look at the assets and they are wonderfully detailed. I want to say thanks to Colossal Order and Paradox for asking me to make the official map for the region pack release. And while I was commissioned to make the map, please note that this video is not sponsored. I'm really proud of this map and I'm excited to share it with you. Now, while making the map, I learned a lot about this region, its landscape, some history, and how to make a map with this type of terrain, and I want to share some of that with you now. I visited the Netherlands many years ago, which included traveling by train, so I got to see the countryside. It's a beautiful country, and I'm honored to have this opportunity. Now, let's talk about the elephant in the room. If you haven't heard by now, Colossal Order is working on implementing bikes into the game. They posted a developer diary about it yesterday that will be linked in the description. Honestly, I wish the release of this pack and map coincided with bikes being added to the game, but it seems they're just not ready. However, none of this should take away from the fantastic work by the creators, and I'm going to make the best of the situation. I'll expand a bit more on this in a moment, but quickly, let's go over what I'll cover in this video. First, we'll go over a brief history of the location and why I chose it. Then I'll explain how I created the terrain and the rivers. Next, we'll talk about the transportation networks, followed by foliage and detailing. Lastly, I'll show off the map tiles and resource distribution. Alright, let's get into it. Zwolle is a historic city in the northeastern Netherlands and the capital of the Overijssel province. It's situated on a strategic piece of land between several rivers. Zwolle's prosperity and design are directly tied to its role as a key member of the Hanseatic League, a powerful medieval trading confederation. Active from the late 12th to 17th century, the League was a network of northern European cities that cooperated to protect trade routes and control commerce. Located on the IJssel River, Zwolle's strategic position allowed it to become a vital trade hub, connecting inland Europe with the North and Baltic Seas. The wealth generated from its Hanseatic trade influenced the city's architecture, funding the construction of grand merchant houses, warehouses, and the city's unique star-shaped canal system, which today stands as a clear legacy of its prosperous past. Fast forward to May 1940, and the Netherlands was captured after a swift and brutal German invasion, which included the devastating bombing of Rotterdam. This forced the Dutch military to surrender, placing the entire country under Nazi occupation, and setting the stage for over 4 years of hardship and suffering. Then, in April 1945, the Dutch city of Zwolle was liberated in an unconventional and heroic manner by 2 Canadian soldiers, Leo Major and his friend Corporal Wilfred Arsenault. Their initial mission was to scout the German forces in the city for a planned Canadian artillery strike. Unfortunately, tragedy struck early when Arsenault was killed at the city's outskirts, leaving Major to continue on alone. Instead of retreating, Major, enraged by the loss of his friend, infiltrated the city on his own. He created the illusion of a full-scale assault, firing his submachine gun and throwing grenades to trick German garrison into believing a larger force was attacking. His actions caused the Germans to panic and withdraw, effectively liberating Zwolle without the planned bombardment and saving it from potential destruction. This incredible act of courage and cunning spared the town from further damage and devastation, and its people have long remembered Major's role in their freedom. He even has a street named after him there. Following the devastation of World War II, the Netherlands entered a period of reconstruction, economic recovery, and social change. Then, in the early 1970s, the Stop de Kindermoord, or Stop the Child Murder, movement began in the Netherlands, sparked by a dramatic rise in child traffic deaths. Its primary goal was to make streets safer by pushing for pedestrian and cyclist-friendly policies and physically calming traffic. The movement achieved a significant shift in urban planning, leading to the creation of extensive bicycle lanes, car-free zones, and the Woonerf, or living street concept. This legacy is a cornerstone of the Netherlands' modern reputation as a cycling-friendly nation with a strong focus on livable cities. And that brings us to modern-day Zwolle, where the urban landscape is a striking blend of historic and modern architecture, where well-preserved medieval structures and canals coexist with ambitious new developments. The city's infrastructure reflects this status as a major national transportation hub, with its robust railway network and strong emphasis on bicycle-friendly urban design and sustainable mobility solutions. Now, if we step out of the real world for a moment and back into City Skylines 2, we won't have bikes and cycling infrastructure for a while. So that means we need to pretend we're building the Netherlands of 50 years ago. And like the planners and engineers over those last 50 years, we will need to retrofit that infrastructure into our cities when that update comes. Again, I still feel that this map and region pack would have been the perfect way to celebrate the addition of bikes to the game. But that won't stop me from having fun and learning how to best use these assets in the meantime. Okay, now let's move on to the map overview. So why did I choose Zwolle for the official region pack map? When I learned I would be creating the map for this region pack, I started researching locations that inspired me. The first thing I did was check Paradox Mods for Netherlands maps and eliminated any locations that were already published. I wanted to give people something new. Then, I went to Google Earth and started looking for interesting looking locations that would fit well within a one-to-one CS2 map. I typically like my maps to have natural boundaries, like water or mountains, and I knew that this would be a challenge here. I also asked my fellow Dutch-loving Canadian Moose, what his favorite cities in the Netherlands were, and Zwolle was on the list. I hadn't heard of it before, but once I saw the star-shaped canal system and heard of its historical ties to Canada, I knew this was it. So, I got myself some terrain data and got to work. I framed the map with the star almost in the center of the map, with the Isel River flowing out in one corner and these forested hills in another. I had to accept that the rest of the map boundary would be flat, but I could work with it. I started with a height map, but modified the terrain to flatten areas, add dikes and canals, then represent the polder system and ensure the rivers flowed properly. Note that the terrain data includes all surfaces, including trees and buildings. So I had to flatten many areas, while being careful not to eliminate canals and ditches. Most of the canals I included might look too deep or the banks too steep. But this was intentional so that players can build keys for canals, hopefully in most cases without mods. I know it doesn't look super realistic, but it's about as good as you can get in this game without spending endless hours with terraforming and water tools. Getting the rivers to flow right was a challenge because the map is so flat. I tried to make the terrain around the upstream areas slightly higher than downstream. Then I placed many water sources to regulate the flow of water. Including all of the water sources for canals and rivers, there are exactly 429 water sources. Wow. Anyway, this whole process took a long time to get right, and even now it's still not quite perfect, but I think it's at least good enough to be playable. I also kept these jetties or boenen along the sides of the rivers. When I was further along in the production of the map, I realized that I needed dikes beside almost all the riverbanks, and the data didn't really pick that up, so I actually had to build all of these myself. The Netherlands' history and geography are deeply intertwined with its polder system, a remarkable method of land reclamation where dikes are built to enclose an area of water and then drained. This method was historically vital, allowing the nation to literally create more territory to support its growing population and economy in a country where a significant portion of the land was below sea level. How I implemented this in game isn't perfect, as I realized a little bit too late in the production that some areas are the same elevation or higher than they should be. Now, while this isn't perfect, I think it's close enough to represent how it should look. But if you decide to make your own Netherlands-inspired map, I recommend starting with the highest and lowest river elevations, then slope the land between them, build the dikes, and then flatten out your buildable land slightly lower than the river or sea level. Now, with all that said, I'm ultimately happy with how it turned out. Once the terrain and water were mostly figured out, I began to work on the highways and railways. I included some of the real interchanges, like this cloverleaf with a single flyover, and this rotary interchange. When looking on Google Earth, I could tell this trumpet interchange to the east was relatively new, so I looked back at some historical images and decided to build the previous interchange so you can rebuild it yourself if you want. I also included some of the other minor road networks to provide access to other parts of the map. When it came to rail, I built most of the existing infrastructure, except maybe one or two lines, and I couldn't help but use the new double-track rail bridge with its beautiful truss arch. Now, when I saw the Netherlands train station in the region pack, I noticed the tracks in the asset are slightly elevated on embankments, so I got the idea to try and make it easy to plop down. I placed the rail lines in this segment here at 3.75 meters above the rest of the terrain, which seems to match up with the station. And this is something just to keep in mind when using this asset in general. Now, the keen-eyed folks out there might notice that some of the networks on the elevated embankments are a bit higher than they are in the real world, but this is to satisfy some of the vanilla clearances in the interchanges. Moving on, there are 4 air connections and 1 seaway connection. That's right, you can get ships here. Sort of. The rivers are mostly too narrow for even the narrowest seaway. However, I noticed this river port to the north and got the idea that it was maybe possible to do something. So I did some testing and slightly widened the river at this location to make a narrow seaway fit. And the adjacent port area is big enough for cargo and passenger harbors. But we'll have to wait and see if we can do something a little better with the upcoming Bridges and Ports DLC. After completing the transportation networks, my next step was foliage and detailing. I used a few different custom tree brushes that you can see here. I recently came up with this method to draw the number on the map to remind myself what my brushes look like until I get used to them. All of the brushes use a mix of trees you would commonly find in the area. Now, spruces aren't common to the Netherlands. However, while looking at some of the forested areas on Street View, I noticed some trees that looked like spruce, so I used them in more densely forested areas. Otherwise, you can mostly find deciduous trees with some pines throughout the map. I also used the bush brush to represent more marshy areas or separate farmland. I noticed that a lot of the farm fields here don't have taller windbreaks. And just a quick note that you will experience all 4 seasons on this map, but don't worry, I chose a climate that only sometimes snows and not for long. Otherwise, I didn't do a lot of detailing on the map. I added a few mill ruins here and there where you would see a pump or historically a windmill that would pump water out over the dikes to the river. And I included a couple of simple locks between rivers and canals that are used to transport ships between different water levels. There are also a few other fun Easter eggs, mostly street names, around the map for you to find. My next step is typically to add resources, but I decided to do the map tiles next so that I could use their boundaries to place resources in some areas. The map tiles mostly follow farm fields or rivers and canals, but I also included the provincial boundary between Overijssel and Gelderland to the south. And here you can see your starting area at the start of a new game. Once the map tiles were done, I started adding resources. Now, forests were already done, so I just needed to add fertile land, ore, oil, and groundwater. Fertile land was fairly easy to place in the most obvious locations. But as usual, since the Economy 2.0 update, I didn't go overboard with the fertile land so as to not make the tiles or their upkeep too expensive. Ore was a bit more tricky, but still quite simple. I noticed a few mining operations in the area when looking around Google Earth, and they were usually mixed in with the farms, so I placed some in those areas as well, and a few up in the hilly forested area to the south. Now when it comes to oil, I did some research and discovered that the Netherlands does actually have some on-land gas reserves, and some of the largest ones are actually not far from Zwolle. So while the placement of oil on this map isn't totally accurate, it's still somewhat plausible. And lastly, for groundwater, I placed groundwater near water sources where you would expect a high water table. And while my placement may not look very realistic, it's practical for the purposes of the game. I see too many custom maps published with large areas of groundwater. Firstly, this makes the tiles and their upkeep more expensive. And more importantly, if you pollute just a small part of that groundwater source, you pollute the whole thing. So I prefer to make several smaller groundwater areas for better playability. It's crazy to think that this is my 10th map for City Skylines 2. I want to say thank you to everyone who has played on any of my maps. I wouldn't have had this opportunity without you. The download links for this map and the region pack are in the description. Thanks so much for checking out the video, and I hope you enjoy the map. Let me know what you think in the comments, and if you'd like to maybe see an alternate version with less infrastructure and detailing. If there's enough interest, I might consider making one. I'm looking forward to seeing what people build on this one. I always love seeing people's creations on my maps. Thank you again for watching, and happy building. Dag.